Greg Donovan had always lived a disciplined, steady life. At 58, he was the kind of man who believed in effort, loyalty, and quiet consistency, values his parents had built into him like steel beams. For 26 years, he'd shared his home in suburban Denver with Rebecca, his wife, a literature teacher, graceful, intelligent, admired by everyone she met. Together they'd raised 2 children, Michael and Sarah, both grown and living their own lives now. From the outside, the Donovans were the picture of lasting love, weekend hikes, family dinners, and holiday photos filled with smiles that looked genuine. But smiles can lie. It began subtly, as most betrayals do. Rebecca had always been predictable. Same perfume, same morning routine, same gentle goodnight kiss before bed. But lately, Greg noticed changes. She started buying new dresses, changing her hairstyle, and wearing makeup even when she wasn't going anywhere special. She took her phone everywhere, even into the bathroom, and her laughter when texting someone late at night wasn't the laughter he knew. One evening, while Greg was reading in his study, Rebecca came home late. Her hair was wind-blown, her cheeks flushed. "Traffic was insane," she said, avoiding his eyes. Greg nodded, saying nothing, but something in his chest tightened. That night, lying in bed beside her, he listened to the rhythmic sound of her breathing and stared at the ceiling. His instincts, the ones that had guided him through decades of business and fatherhood, screamed that something was wrong. By morning, he made a call. The number was one he'd saved years ago but never thought he'd use. David Marlowe, a private investigator. "Mr. Donovan," said the calm, steady voice on the line, "I can find the truth, but it might hurt." Greg exhaled. "The truth's already hurting me, David. I just need to know how bad it is." As he hung up, the first snow of October fell outside, and Greg stood at the window, watching it blanket the driveway. Quiet, cold, relentless. He had no idea that the next week would dismantle everything he thought he knew about love, loyalty, and the woman sleeping beside him. The following days passed with the cruel slowness of suspense. Greg went to work, answered emails, attended meetings, but none of it registered. Every night when Rebecca said she was grading papers or meeting her colleagues, he noted the time she left and the time she came home. Always later, always smiling, always distant. Then came the call. "Mr. Donovan," said David's voice, "I have what you asked for. You should see this in person." Greg drove downtown in silence, his hands gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. At David's office, a manila envelope waited on the desk. David didn't speak much, just slid it forward and said, "I'm sorry." Inside were photographs. Rebecca sitting in a cozy downtown cafe, her face glowing with a kind of joy Greg hadn't seen in years. Across from her sat Patrick Sullivan, their neighbor. Younger, fit, confident. A man Greg had shared barbecues and beers with, someone he'd trusted around his home. More photos followed. Rebecca and Patrick in the same cafe 2 nights later, laughing, leaning close, fingers brushing across the table. Then finally the one that hollowed Greg out completely. The 2 of them entering a cheap motel, her hand in his, her wedding ring still on. David's report was thorough. GPS pings, receipts, timestamps, even a voice recording of Rebecca saying softly, "He doesn't excite me anymore." Greg sat frozen, the pages trembling in his hands. His mind wanted to deny it, but his heart already knew. The woman he'd built his life with was gone. Or worse, she'd been pretending all along. When he got home that night, Rebecca greeted him with her usual smile. "Long day?" she asked casually. "Yeah," he said softly. "Longer than you think." She kissed his cheek, oblivious, and went upstairs to shower. Greg sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the photos spread across the table. His heart didn't break, it hardened. By midnight, he'd contacted a divorce lawyer, separated finances, and backed up every piece of evidence onto a private drive. By dawn, he had a plan. It was a Friday night when it all came crashing down. The house was quiet, except for the steady ticking of the old wall clock. Greg sat at the dining table, the envelope of evidence beside him, waiting. Rebecca came in around 9, wearing a soft blue sweater and smelling faintly of a man's cologne Greg didn't own. "Hey," she said, setting down her purse. "You're still up?" "Yeah," he replied. "We need to talk." Something in his tone made her stop. "What's wrong?" He motioned to the chair across from him. "Sit." He slid the envelope toward her. Slowly, she opened it. Her hand trembled as the first photo fell out, her and Patrick smiling. Then another, and another. The color drained from her face. "Greg, I can explain." He raised a hand. "Don't. You've explained enough already. To him." Tears welled in her eyes. "It's not what it looks like." Greg let out a small, bitter laugh. "Then tell me what it is, Rebecca. Tell me what I'm looking at. Because right now, it looks like 26 years of my life were traded for cheap motel rooms and half-baked lies." She broke down then, sobbing into her hands, begging, apologizing, promising change. But Greg wasn't angry anymore. He was beyond anger. He was clear. "I already filed for divorce. The papers will arrive Monday. The house is mine. The accounts are divided. You'll get what's fair. Nothing more." Rebecca froze. "You already?" He nodded. "I found out about you and Patrick 2 weeks ago. I wanted to see if you'd tell me. You didn't." As she cried, Greg stood, grabbing his coat. "Oh, and one more thing," he said at the door. "Patrick's ex-wife has all the evidence, too. You might want to call him before she does." Her eyes widened in horror. "Greg, please!" But he was gone. That night, Rebecca's world collapsed. By morning, she was placed on leave from her teaching position due to the scandal. Patrick's ex filed for custody, using the affair as leverage. And Greg? He slept soundly for the first time in months. 6 months later, Greg Donovan stood on his balcony, watching the sun rise over the Rockies. The city below hummed faintly with life. His apartment was smaller than the old house, but it was his, quiet, clean, and free of ghosts. He had lost weight, started hiking again, and even joined a local photography club. Every morning, he brewed his coffee, opened the curtains, and let sunlight flood his life. Rebecca had moved out of town after the divorce. The house was sold, the settlement finalized. Their kids, Michael and Sarah, had sided with Greg, disgusted by what their mother had done. Sometimes they called her out of obligation, but never for long. One crisp spring afternoon, Greg joined a local hiking group for a weekend trip near Bear Peak. That's where he met Claire, a graphic designer, widowed, warm-hearted, and refreshingly real. They talked easily, laughed often, and shared a kind of quiet understanding that didn't need explaining. One morning, standing at the summit, Claire smiled at him. "You seem lighter." He chuckled softly. "I guess I am. I carried a lot of weight I didn't realize wasn't mine." She smiled. "Sounds like you finally let it go." He looked out over the vast, sunlit mountains and nodded. "Yeah. Sometimes you have to break apart to see what's worth keeping." Down below, the wind swept through the trees, and for the first time in years, Greg felt peace. Not the numb kind, but the real kind. The past no longer haunted him. It had taught him.